About 6 years ago, I finished my degree in geology and got my dream job. I'd always wanted to work outside, so I applied as a park ranger at Auburn State Recreation Area Park in Northern California. I spent a lot of time on trail maintenance, making sure hiking trails are accessible and clear. I also picked up trash, cleaned restrooms, and if you've ever been to a state park, you know how they can get, and supervised volunteers. But the thing about being the newbie is that you get the jobs your seniors don't want, and for some reason, nobody wanted to handle the museum house. The museum was a small historical building on the park grounds, the Waller House. I wasn't much of a history buff, but it was a nice building. Small, obviously old. It looked like it needed some work done, but I figured that maybe there wasn't room in the budget for up-to-date maintenance. Or they were worried about messing things up for a building that was built long before fire codes were a thing. I wasn't the only new hire for the park. There was a nice girl about my age who was one of the docents for the museum. Because we were the two newbies, we had to open and close the museum during its working hours. The first week, everything went great. I met her to unlock the doors, make sure all the lights were on, and nothing had been stolen or damaged. Raccoons were a problem. And then I'd say goodbye and head out to the rest of my day. After a few weeks, I noticed that she looked a little weird when I'd report to help her lock up. I figured it was just because tourists had been a pain. You would not believe how many little kids take the "do not touch" signs as a personal challenge. It wasn't until the fall, when the nights started coming earlier, that I noticed she really looked upset when I met her for lockup. I asked if she was okay, and she said sure, in this voice that sounded like it was going to break. It was so tense. The next day, the museum was set to open, and I showed up with my keys, but Marlene didn't. I waited around for a little bit, but my boss was a stickler for everything being on time, and for a small museum, this one was popular. I decided to call my boss to find out what was going on. Marlene didn't call in sick, did she? I'm about to open the Waller House, but she's not here. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Marlene quit last night. I was shocked. She hadn't said anything to me about it. What do you want me to do? I'm going to have to ask you to cover for Marlene until we get another docent. Well, I wasn't exactly happy to be inside rather than outside. But one of the essential duties of a park ranger is literally other duties as assigned. So I went with it. I'd never really spent much time in the museum before. I think it was a converted house from back when the park had been a private property. There were a lot of daily life exhibits, like trunks with some personal belongings, like shoes and clothes, some old books and newspapers, a whole collection of antique buttons, farming implements, and my personal favorite, a set of fancy silverware. The silverware set was real silver, with fancy carved handles. It was displayed in the middle of the room, far enough in that visitors would be drawn into looking at everything else, and centrally enough that you'd know it was something you really wanted to look at. Nothing looked weird, and nothing looked like it was out of the ordinary. Once we started getting visitors, and I had to answer questions, I started to learn a little more about the museum, mostly by reading the plaques on the exhibits. It was a converted carriage house, but the artifacts were from a family that had originally owned the land, and it had a heating problem. There was this weird cold spot around the silverware set. Every time I watched a guest go up to look at the display, they'd shiver. I decided I needed to check the area out once I had a free minute. If there was a maintenance issue, I need to document it. When it came time to close, I walked over to the silver case and immediately started to shiver. Man, that was cold. I couldn't tell you where the draft was coming from, but I felt like I needed a heavier jacket if I stood there much longer. That's when I heard it. There was a noise, like something closing, and I swore I heard footsteps. I looked around fast, but I didn't see anything. I documented the cold spot on my maintenance report, then shut off the lights. Just as I was turning out the last one, I heard the footsteps again, and then, I kid you not, I heard something whisper in my ear. Leave. Leave me alone. When I say I got out, I mean I'm surprised I didn't leave scorch marks on the floor. I was still standing outside, trying to calm down, when one of the other park rangers drove up. You okay? He took one look at me and just sighed. So, you met Nancy. Who's Nancy? Nancy Caldwell, it turns out, had been the name of the young lady who'd come back east to marry one of the landowner's sons. She'd died of cholera before the wedding, and that silver set I liked so much, that had been part of her dowry. Every docent who quit within a couple of weeks talked about getting creeped out. The other ranger told me that Nancy wasn't dangerous. At least, he didn't think she was. But she did hang out near the silverware set, and she was known to cause a little trouble. She'd move things around, whisper in people's ears, and generally spook the hell out of visitors she didn't like. What do I do? I'm filling in here until we get another docent. We've had a lot of docents over the years, but there's one who lasted a long time. She always told me that Nancy liked people with manners. The next morning, when I had to open up, I knocked on the museum door before I opened it. Excuse me. Good morning, Miss Nancy. I'm opening up for the day. Don't scare me. Did I feel stupid talking to thin air? Maybe. But did it work? Mostly. There were a few times when I felt like someone was standing next to me when there was no one there, and I still heard footsteps when the place was empty. I said good morning when I opened up, and good night, Miss Nancy. Have a nice evening. I'll be back tomorrow, when I closed at night. I guess it worked, because a few times I felt like something was in the room with me, or something would be moved overnight, but I never got really scared. I was the relief docent for 2 weeks, and then we got someone new. But before I went back to my trail work, I made sure to tell the new hire how to handle the museum's other occupant. I have a story that is from when I was a kid that I can't explain. I honestly haven't told anyone about it, outside of therapists and the occasional Reddit forum, but it stuck by me pretty much my entire life. This happened when I was way back in elementary school. I don't remember exactly what year I was in or anything, but I know I was pretty young. I lived in upstate New York back then with my family. For the most part, everything was pretty normal. The trouble was that I was kind of a stupid kid. By that, I mean I would wander around places I really shouldn't have been, for starters. This has caused a lot of trouble for me throughout my life, but on this particular day, I was feeling a lot braver than I should have been. After I got home from school, there was about a 2-hour gap between then and my parents getting home. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I wasn't alone. My older brother was there, either in late middle school or early high school at the time. He tried to keep track of me as best as he could, but obviously, he couldn't just watch me all day without ever getting distracted or taking his eyes off me. Those times, I would run pretty rampant around the neighborhood. We were lucky because we had sort of a really big backyard. We had some trees and things, and for living in a suburb, it was a generally large property. That meant I had a lot of room to roam around in. So this day, I'm roaming around, and I hear really weird noises coming from a deeper area in the yard. I considered myself to be very brave, again, stupid. So I immediately went to investigate. From a little bit of distance, I caught a glimpse of it for the first time. For starters, I'll never forget this image. The image of its nasty, scaly skin. It was almost like a lizard, the texture of it. It looked dry and flaky, and somehow very sharp all at once. It was green in some areas, but a more fleshy gray in others. It was tall, really tall, probably taller than any normal person could naturally grow. I want to say 8, maybe 9 feet. It may have been a bit shorter. I was just a kid, but I do remember it being very tall. The last thing that stuck with me about the thing's appearance, what really traumatized me as a kid, were its eyes. It had these snake-looking eyes that were a muddy gold with slits for pupils. And when this thing blinked, and it blinked about the same amount as you or I would, it blinked sideways, like its eyes closed left and right instead of up and down. I could have puked. I wanted to puke too when I saw what it was doing. The creature had blood all over it, all over its mouth, its hands, and all over the surrounding area. When I looked at what it was eating, what I saw were about half a dozen bunny corpses, just cute little rabbits, all bloody and disgusting. The mental image traumatizes me to this day. It was so bizarre how inhuman and human it looked at the same time. When it chewed, it did so with the patience of someone tearing into a tough steak. And at one point, I remember it wiping its mouth. Its hands were almost the same size as a normal person's hands, except for the very noticeable presence of massive black claws that adorned each of its fingers. I watched, young and impressionable, as it used those claws to rip apart Bugs Bunny. I wanted to book it immediately, before I started to scream, or cry, or freak out, but I was frozen. I was terrified that if I did run, if I moved at all, at that point, it would notice me, and I'd be next. After all, I was small, and I was not going to be able to defend myself if things came down to that. Luckily, they didn't. But the thought is gruesome and scary as all hell. So there I stood, frozen in fear, watching this thing destroy those bunny carcasses. I'm relieved, looking back, that it wasn't cats or dogs or anything, but it was still foul. After a bit of time had passed, the thing was finished, and it curled up into this big ball on the ground. I figured it was maybe going to sleep, some kind of post-eating nap, and that would be a good time for me to run off for dear life. Then my brother, my dutiful brother, started calling out my name as he began looking for me. I cursed myself for him noticing me being gone, but doubtably so. I had this very urgent issue to handle before I could reveal my position. As my brother inched closer, his voice got louder, and the creature stood up with a start. I swear that this thing looked right through me, shot its glare straight in my direction, but even if it did, it didn't do anything about it. It almost looked like it was thinking, planning, somehow evaluating what to do. My brother suddenly was only a few feet behind me. I turned to warn him, to let him know he was in danger, but after I explained, he gave me a look of total confusion, asking me what the hell I was talking about. I turned back around, and it was gone. I know it sounds very far-fetched, right? But it isn't fake. This really, honestly happened. My brother, despite my advice, went to investigate, but all that was left was a few torn-up pieces of bunny, alongside quite a display of blood. My brother determined that the bunnies were what I was trying to warn him about, apologized that I had to see something gross like that, and shooed me back into the house with little other comment. I've never seen anything like that again. Not ever. But it's something I am glad to be rid of, proud to have lived through. Thank you for listening. It was during deer season. I live in rural Wisconsin, so it's kind of a big deal. Some people say hunting is going the way of the dinosaur, but I don't really see that, not in the Midwest anyway. There seems to always be a healthy crop of hunters going out every season. I don't know, I could be wrong I guess, but it doesn't seem to be fading away. I had just bought a Remington 700 for the new season. Man, that rifle is sweet. I got it in solid black, like they use for SWAT teams across the country. It's a beautiful rifle. Shoots like a dream. I had wanted one for a long time and did a bunch of research on it. It's really fantastic. Not only is it the most popular bolt action ever, it's probably the best bolt action ever made. Period. I get into that kind of stuff. I'm kind of a history buff as well, so I've researched bolt actions from the first ever made to the famous ones in both world wars. Gun guys get into that kind of stuff, you know. It's good to see where things come from. It'll be a sad, sad day when we stop producing bolt action rifles. Hopefully, that won't be for a long, long time. I was working on the property, you know. Chores never really seem to end, do they? I was working on some fencing for the best part of the afternoon. It was about 4 or 4:30, I think. I had my rifle slung over my shoulder because you never know what might happen when you're out. I was reconnecting the wire mesh to the posts. Sometimes they come loose from weather or animals or just normal wear and tear. It was nice and cool out, and had been beautiful that entire week, really. I'm on my knees securing some wire, and then everything goes silent. Now, if you've spent any time outdoors, you know that's a bad sign. I unslung my rifle and scanned the area around me. There are black bear in Wisconsin, and they will go on your property, looking to root through your garbage, or tear up your garden even. My neighbor has some sheep on his property, which can attract all manner of animals. I didn't see the sheep out, but they could easily have been. Nothing seemed to be around, so I slowly got up and kept walking the fence line. A few minutes later, I started to hear birds and things again. I finished the back of the property and was moving on to the fence I share with my neighbor's property. This fence helps contain the sheep, and sometimes sheep can be jerks, you know. So a lot of times this is the sign that needs the most repair. They'll itch themselves on it and kick it, and you just be animals with the fence line. A lot of times you'll find their hair all over the fence, so there'll be little white tufts hanging off the wood or wire. I'm putting this one section back together, and I get this strong smell of decay in the air. I look around and don't see anything, so I go back to work. I finish the section, and a big flock of birds shoot out of the tree line. I slide my rifle off my shoulder and pull the bolt back, loading around. It gets eerily quiet again. I mean, nothing is making a sound. I decide to stand to get a better look around me. That's when I first see it. Something moving in the trees, pale against the brush. Pale means it's not a bear, but it could possibly be a wolf. It could have been a white hart as well, but it seemed more cream than white. It was pretty far, so it was hard to tell at first. I watched it moving pretty fast, and you could hear the brush moving and crunching as it moved. I figured it's just going to move off, and I don't have to worry about it. I kept my rifle in my hand, but I slowly started to move to the other section of fencing, keeping my eyes on the tree line. Maybe it was because I moved. I don't know. because I didn't really make any sound. I know how to stay quiet as a hunter. The thing stops, then seems to come back my way. I stop, and I bring my rifle up just in case. It's moving slow through the tree line, and then it disappears. I have no idea where it is now. I can't see it. I can't hear it. I just stand there still, trying to figure out where this thing went. I wasn't afraid, but I was concerned. Anytime something stops and seems to notice you, you have no idea what is going to happen next. I will admit, I did have goosebumps, waiting and looking for whatever it was. It seemed like a long time passed, but it was probably only a few seconds, maybe a minute. I don't really know. All of a sudden, this thing comes crashing out of the brush. It was tall, at least 6 feet, maybe bigger. Against the trees, it was a little hard to tell. Its arms were skinny and long. Its legs were too, like really skinny. Its torso was thin. You could see its ribs, and the skin just seemed to be pulled tight across the bone. Its head was bigger. Its eyes sunk in. They just looked like dark pits. I couldn't see its eyes. I smelled a strong scent of decay in the air once it came out. I stood there, and it looked at me and started to kind of hunch over, moving its head back and forth. When it took a step towards me, I raised my rifle and pointed at it. It didn't stop. I shot a round at it, and it stopped still. It made a low hiss, then ran back into the woods. It was fast or faster than a deer, and at first it made noise moving through the brush, but quickly went silent. I don't know what it was. I don't really want to know what it was. I've never really spoken of it, besides with my family, and the majority of them don't really seem to believe it. I haven't seen anything like it since, and that was about 2 years ago. My neighbor hasn't seen anything, as far as I know. I think he'd tell me. However, maybe 3 months after I saw the thing, my neighbor did lose a dog. I feel bad I never said anything, but I'm not sure he'd believe me anyway. I used to spend almost all of my time out in the wilderness about 10 years ago. I worked as a ranger in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. A lot of my time was spent on horseback. We managed the Teton Wilderness area. It's almost 600,000 acres of wilderness, and the only way to manage it effectively was to use horses. It's a very wet wilderness that has a lot of river and creek crossings. I was going along a river on horseback one day, heading for an area where we were working on trail repair. We were on a familiar trail that was one of our favorites. My horse loved it. That general area was a good workout for the horses, as it had a lot of natural obstacles, like fallen logs for us to jump, and my horse liked to splash in the stream. My mare was a little temperamental though, feisty, and always taking in everything around her. She was always very alert, but that day, she started feeling more agitated than feisty. She was dancing around and didn't seem to want to move forward. There was definitely something that had her attention and that she didn't like. I couldn't see anything between the trees that would have upset her. I didn't hear or smell anything, but horses have very keen senses, and it isn't unnatural for a horse to be aware of something you're not. I figured there were people walking somewhere through the trees, or maybe an animal I couldn't see. I tried to urge her onward, but she wouldn't budge. She just kept dancing around on the spot and trying to spin around like she wanted to go back the way we had come. Then she suddenly went shock still. I could feel every muscle in her body locked tight, and tremors were going down her spine. She was ready to bolt. She had raised herself to full height, head up, ears pricked up, nostrils flared, and she kept snorting. And then, out of nowhere, this thing darted out in front of us. It ran out on all fours and stopped in the middle of the trail. Then it stood up on its hind legs and just stared at us. It was about 20 feet away from us. I hadn't had any feeling or hint that there was something in the trees, but when it sprang out, I felt instant dread. The thing we saw was not animal or human, though it had a very human shape. When I say it ran on all fours, imagine a human bent over, with hands and feet flat on the floor. It had disproportionately long arms, and it was really thin and spindly. It was way too thin to be human. Its head was wider than its waist. It was hairless as far as I could tell, and its skin was a grayish-brown color that made it blend in with the forest. Everything about it was disproportionately long, like all its features, from fingers to toes, had been stretched out. When it stood up, it was tall. It seemed to be about eye level with my horse. I'm not sure if it's because of the distance between us that I couldn't make out its facial features, or if it just didn't have facial features to make out. I can only remember big black eyes staring at us. I imagine if I touched it, it would feel rough. The skin didn't look smooth, but not really scaly either. It stood like it was ready to tackle someone. I got a good but brief look at it, because in the next moment, my horse spun around and burst into a gallop from a standstill and galloped back up the trail. I was so shocked and freaked out that I didn't try to stop her. I think I actually urged her on, holding on as tight as I could. I don't think the thing chased after us, although I admit I didn't dare look back to see if it was. But the horse galloped like the fires of hell were after her. Only once we were back at the trailhead, where there was some other people, did she stop. There's no way I could have stopped her if I wanted to. The people at the trailhead gawked at us suddenly, bursting off the trail like that. Even though my horse considered this place safe enough to stop, she still kept her attention on the trail behind her. She kept staring in that direction, wide-eyed and snorting. I don't know if that thing was lurking in the tree line or what. I managed to ride her back toward the stable, but it was hard to calm her down, and she seemed to be in shock. We went on a long trot in the opposite direction to burn off some of that nervous energy. Later, my supervisor kept saying it must have been a deer with chronic wasting disease or something. Obviously, if you hadn't seen that thing with your own eyes, you would be grasping at straws. I really don't know what to make of it. I don't even like thinking about it. I've spooked myself just writing it out. I don't understand how I'd never seen any sign of such thing before. And then, all of a sudden, there it was right in front of me. Over the next several weeks, we gradually started to feel a little more normal. But I seriously think both me and my horse had lasting PTSD from that event. Looking back now, it all started with one goat. It was a year ago when I lost one of my prized goats. Some animal had killed it. I chalked it up to a predator attack typical for farmers, especially new farmers who didn't have their shit together. My fences were not the best. In fact, they were terrible. Most likely, a coyote came at night and quickly dispatched my goat, and obviously, something disturbed it before it could start eating. That would be the only reason why a coyote would leave its kill. I was so overwhelmed with grief and regret that I overlooked the obvious. There wasn't any blood. It is easy to see my mistake when I look back, but that realization might have helped me sooner. However, I didn't, and soon I had a crisis on my hands. The first goat was older, so I chalked it up to natural causes. I found it near the end of the pasture. There were no signs of predation, because I didn't see the two small holes on the neck of the goat. I am positive that they would be there now, after seeing what happens to the victims. The next goat was a younger buck that put up more of a fight. There was blood everywhere. The wound was jagged from the flailing goat. I had heard the commotion while on the porch, admiring the stars overhead. By the time I got to the goat, it was already dead. There were tracks nearby, and they were unlike anything I ever saw before. There were 3 toes, and individual scales on the feet made marks in the soil. I knew they were reptilian, based on my biology classes in college. However, their tracks were enormous. There were no native species that had tracks like that, and I'm not even sure non-native species left tracks like that either. After the second goat was killed, I installed electric fencing, which seemed to work. I didn't have any incidents until about 6 months later. By then, my guard was down, and the electric fencer crapped the bed one hot night in August. This left my herd open to attack from the obviously intelligent creature. I noticed it had tested the fence several times previously because of the alien tracks left behind near various sections of the fence line. It had been about 6 weeks since I noticed the last set of tracks, so I figured it had finally moved on to a neighboring farm. Again, I was admiring the stars on the porch when I heard the goats were obviously in distress. My heart sank. A cold sweat broke out because I feared the worst. I knew the fencer was on its last leg since I had bought it at an auction earlier in the year. But never in a million years did I think that damn thing would return. It goes to show how naive I was as a new farmer. I quickly grabbed the gun and ran toward the noise. It was a clear night, and the moon was out. I couldn't believe what I saw when I made it to the goats. 2 goats were sprawled on the ground, dead already, and a third was fighting off a creature. It was a creature I had never seen in my life before. The creature was reptilian, for sure. It had brownish-green scales that shone brightly in the moonlight. It had round, dark eyes and sharp teeth. Most notable were the 2 long canine teeth that punctured holes in the victims. I then realized that the creature drank the blood of the goats rather than eating the flesh. The canines tore the flesh into jagged streaks as the goats twisted against the creature's bite. Along the back of the creature were spines like a bluegill. The creature stood about 3 feet, but it was extremely muscular. It was able to subdue the third goat as I watched in horror quickly. I stood frozen as the creature sank those canines into the goat's neck. It began to lap blood with its forked tongue like a dog drinking from a water bowl. Its eyes rolled back, showing the whites as it took pleasure in the feast. I couldn't move, but finally, a scream escaped my temporary paralysis. The scream drew the creature out of its trance and immediately squared up and began to hiss at me. It was displeased that I interrupted its feast. I mastered my fear long enough to raise the gun to shoot whatever the hell it was, but before pulling the trigger, it ran off into the long grass near the fence line. I stayed with the herd the rest of the night to protect them, but I sometimes feared for my own life. I held the gun tightly throughout the night and would nod off now and then before rousing myself to be vigilant. Once the sun rose, I immediately took care of the carcasses of the slain goats, and then repaired the fencer enough that it would run for the day. I would go into town to buy a new fencer to protect the herd. Before heading into town, I did a quick internet search to find out what I was dealing with. I quickly narrowed down what the creature was. According to the search results, I was dealing with a chupacabra. There were numerous sightings of the beast throughout the southwestern United States, into Mexico, and other Latin American countries. Others posted about their experiences, and I found out numerous people experienced the same thing I was going through. It became clear that once the creature was spotted, it disappeared. I hoped this was correct, but I wasn't taking my chances. It had been several months since the day I spotted the chupacabra. My herd is safe, but I remain vigilant. I hope I never have to see that evil creature again. I have pondered if I should move, but what if I can't escape it? I had the worst bus ride of my life recently, and not because of the reasons you'd think either. I moved to Cincinnati to go to the University of Cincinnati, but that didn't work out too well, which is why I really don't want to go home to my family's place just outside of Detroit. So that all led me to getting a ticket at the last minute for the bus that left at 5 p.m. I get car sick real easy, so when I got on the bus and everyone else was looking at their phones, I wasn't. Can't stare at that little screen when I'm in a moving vehicle, unless I want to feel like garbage. After we passed through Toledo, there wasn't much around, hardly even towns anymore. I was getting bored, just listening to music on my phone, and tired. So you can see why I first thought that I was just imagining things. I kept seeing this bat-like shape in front of the highway street lamps, swooping and diving like it was flying, but trick flying, you know? And I thought, okay, I'm tired and my brain is making this up. It can't really be there. But I kept seeing it, and I had this thought that it was following the bus. I thought that when we stopped, it might attack, which was weird. I mean, because I felt like that idea came from outside of me, almost as if this thing was telling me what it was going to do. I closed my eyes for a while, hoping that when I opened them, it'd be gone. It had to be, because this made no sense. But when I opened my eyes, it was swooping toward the bus. I couldn't deny that it was there. I looked around, but everyone else was focused on their phones, or a magazine, or whatever. Then we came to the next stop, which was Monroe. I couldn't wait to get there, because I was sure this thing would go away once we got to the city. Monroe's not a real big town though, and just one person got out at this deserted station. No one was around, and it was sort of late by then, at least 8 p.m. As we pulled away, I saw the thing standing by the streetlight, leaning against it, just cool as it could be. Maybe if you just glanced quickly at it, it looked like a person. It was person-shaped, but that's where the similarity ended. The wings were folded up behind it, but I could see the ends of them, and I could tell they were big as it was. And it was at least as tall as a person. It had no face at all and red eyes. Those eyes were looking right at me, like it was marking me, noticing me, maybe planning me as its next victim. I hunched down in my seat and pulled my hood over my head, but it still felt like it was looking at me. I was scared, but I didn't know what to do. All I could hope was that it would get tired of waiting for me by the time I reached Detroit. I knew it was crazy to think it was waiting for me. Why me, and not anyone else on the bus? And maybe it wasn't. I thought maybe I was just the only person looking. But I felt it, like I knew it was waiting for me, and I was terrified. I tried not to look out the window anymore, but it was hard because I kept hoping I'd look and it would be gone. I'd glance out, and there it would be, swooping near the lights. At the next stop, Flat Rock, I decided to switch to the other side of the bus. There were plenty of empty seats by that point, so I did. I doubted switching seats would be enough to fool it if it was looking for me. If it didn't follow me though, then it probably wasn't looking for me. For a while, I didn't see it, and I started to relax. But just as we hit the suburbs of Detroit, I saw it again. Now, I wasn't getting off at the station downtown. There was a stop at the edge of town, and that's where my brother was supposed to pick me up. I wondered if the thing was going to attack me the second I stepped off the bus. As we got close to my stop, it disappeared again, but I didn't dare relax. Sure enough, the bus rolled up to the bus shelter. I saw the thing standing by the nearest streetlight, cool as could be, and I didn't see my brother's car. I texted him, and he said, "Running late. There in a few." My darn brother was always late. He was born late, our mama used to say. But this time, if he was late, that thing would get me. The bus pulled up and stopped. A few people were getting out. Like a coward, I waited. Let them off first. I had a feeling it didn't want them, and they did seem to be okay, walking off toward their cars or other buses. Finally, I had to get off. The parking lot was right behind where the thing was standing. I stuck my hands in my pockets and casually walked away from it, keeping it to the edge of the lot. It followed. I picked up the pace, not running because I had nowhere to go. When I saw my brother's car pull up, I broke out in the fastest run I'd ever done in my life. Just as I was within a few feet of his car, I felt wings whoosh by my head. Something grabbed my shoulder, but I shook it off and grabbed the door handle. Slammed the door shut, just as something hit the car window. Hard. "What's that?" my brother said. "Just go," I yelled. As we peeled out of the lot, I saw the thing fly up toward the light again. I didn't even try to explain it to my brother, and we never have talked about it. I'll tell you the story, no one else will. I'll tell it, because I lived it. I was there. I'd say that makes me qualified, wouldn't you? The truth is that there are things out there in the world that we don't understand. Some of them we never will, but some of them we do understand. Some of them we've seen up close and personal. Some we've captured. Others we're protecting. That's what this story is about, you see. The protection of these things and how I became a part of it. I wish I could say I was a part of the BFRO, or the Cryptid Research Organization. If I listed an organization like that, you'd know to dismiss me. You'd have enough of a reason to doubt. I worked for a government agency with a storied and legitimate history. I won't name them outright, because then my name would be as good as known. But I will confirm that it was one of the big ones. When I started there, my responsibilities were menial. I was slow to move up the ladder, but I had my aspirations. When a new operation was being put together, I jumped at the chance. I shouldn't have. I should have left the mysterious corners of the world untouched. I became part of something terrible. Our job was follow-up. Reports would come in detailing strange encounters. We would verify the legitimacy of these claims, and then we would enter the field. We hunted these things. Understand? We detained the ones we could. We buried all of them, kept them quiet. I'm not sure why it's been decided that the world isn't ready to know the truth. The world isn't ready to know what's real. For us, we were just doing our jobs. It made us feel important. We were fools. It was our 5th time out in the field. Most of our investigations had ended quietly. There was one incident where we had detained a specimen, but it was resolved without any violence or tragedy. We didn't get so lucky that 5th time. There were numerous reports of a dog-like creature prowling the rural countryside. Livestock had been affected. One man went missing, although he'd turn up later without a scratch on him. Regardless, it was enough to get our interest. We went to investigate. We set up a few monitoring positions throughout the area. with 2 team members stationed at each point. And sure enough, we found it. Or it found us. My partner and I caught movement on one of our thermal cameras and went to pursue the fleeing hotspot. We coordinated with the others, planned to surround the thing. We hadn't seen it in person yet, but the marker on our cameras was large enough for us to know that it wasn't a deer or a fox. It seemed more intimidated by us than we were of it. Why else would it be running? The more I recount this story, the more I realize how many of the bad parts were due to our egos. Why would nature fear us? The thing turned. We heard a roar first, like a guttural howl, long and bone-chilling. The sound was enough to halt our chase. I remember looking briefly to my partner. In our 4 previous experiences, we had never heard anything like that. We were armed with everything we needed to sedate the creature, of course, but that didn't mean we were ready. Suddenly, its dark shape came sprinting over the horizon. It was big enough to rival the size of a bear. It was fast enough for both of us to realize that running wouldn't save us. It was so dark that we could only see the beast when the light caught its eyes and its teeth. The rest of the furry mass only moved like a shadow. Our only chance was to shoot the dark and hope something hit. We both missed. The sedatives whistled through the night air. The monster snarled. Then it crashed into my companion. They screamed. I turned as quickly as I could, trying to follow the dark blur of their body, caught in the jaws of the beast. The witnesses had been right. It was a wolf. Its posture was a little bizarre, as if it could have stood up on its hind legs at any moment. But otherwise, I fired again, praying that I would hit the animal and not the person it was quickly dragging away. I heard my partner yell again, "You got it." I counted in my head. It wouldn't take long for the animal to go down. Suddenly, a few pairs of flashlights started bobbing around us. The team had arrived, with their lights shining directly on the creature. There was no denying what it was. Some giant abomination, halfway between human and hound. We detained it successfully, I guess. The organization paid for my partner's medical bills. The problems began when I asked for more. I asked for answers. It was clear to me that these things were dangerous. The animal easily could have attacked a civilian instead of our team. What would we have done then? Maybe I was compelled by the memory of my friend being hurt by that beast. I don't know. I could have stopped. I pushed instead. I argued that the people had a right to know. If anyone's lives could be in danger, they should be warned, not misled. My superiors disagreed. They said people couldn't handle it. Maybe they were right. My job got menial again. Then it ended. When it did, I started talking. I started telling the story, the one no one wants told and no one wants to hear. I can count the people who have believed me on just one hand. That's the truth of it. The monsters you're afraid of, they're out there. They're being protected by the very people you would expect to have your back. The next time you see something, be careful who you call. Not everyone values your life. I'll keep this as clear as I can. My thoughts sometimes bleed together. I haven't been sleeping much. I haven't been sleeping at all. I can't keep it away, not for long. It always comes back. It used to give me breaks. I suspect now that it was just to torment me. Give me just enough room to think I can breathe again. Then it would come back and tighten its grip. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Like I said, I haven't been sleeping. Keeping everything in order, start to end, is a little harder now than it used to be. I know everything began a year ago. The same holiday that marked the beginning of all of this recently passed again. It's been a year. I think just one. I own my own home, 2 bedrooms, A laundry room, one bathroom. It's nothing fancy. Just one floor. It's enough for me and my cat. I used to think about family. I used to think about growing beyond just my one lonely person. I don't think about that anymore. 1 year ago, the laundry room. My washer and dryer aren't exactly brand new, but when I heard a knocking coming from the interior of the machine, I knew something was wrong, like a hammer striking aluminum. I hadn't turned it on. I hadn't forgotten about a load of laundry. I thought maybe it was the cat trapped itself inside somehow. I nearly had a heart attack just at the thought. As terrible as it sounds, that almost would have been preferable. At least then I could have opened the lid, let the little guy run out, and been done with it. Instead, I opened the machine and found nothing. Empty. A hollow white void. That was odd, I thought. I closed the lid and waited. Nothing happened. The knocking didn't come back either. Like nails on a chalkboard, long and irritating, spikes being driven into my eardrums. It was coming from the laundry room again. I searched it. Nothing. Before I got in there, I could have sworn something was clawing at the outside of the appliances. The moment I got eyes on the interior of the room, though, it stopped. That time, the silence wasn't enough to dissuade me. The sound had crept into me somehow. I knew that they were there. I knew that something was making them. I became more adamant. I was constantly on alert, waiting for the next chance to discover the invisible culprit. Alert is not a good way to live in your own home. I'll tell you that. It's the reason I stopped sleeping. Every little bump in the night, the groaning of the floorboards and the pipes, became another excuse for me to jump out of bed and start looking. I didn't find it. I didn't see it until it wanted to be seen. The sounds hadn't stopped. They spread beyond the laundry room. I was hearing rapping on the walls, stomping on the floors. Most of them were real. Some of them, I'm sure I imagined. But it got to the point I could no longer stay awake. I wasn't performing at work anymore. I didn't have energy for my friends. A deep, necessary sleep came for me one night. It came for me and ruined everything. It made me vulnerable. I was no longer the watcher, standing at attention, waiting to catch the strange thing making noises in my home. I was the one being watched. And when I woke up to the bed frame jerking suddenly to one side, I saw it, standing at the foot of my bed. Long, claw-like fingers dragged across the curvature of the iron frame. The metal screamed under its fingernails. I screamed under my sheets. It had to bend over to keep from hitting its head on my ceiling. It was long and thin, like its body had been stretched out over time, like it stretched and slithered until it finally broke through, right into my home. I turned and reached for the bedside lamp. It wouldn't help. I just wanted light. It made me feel safer. When I turned on it and looked back toward the creature, it was gone. No one else was standing in my room, but the iron bed frame was scarred, where I'd seen the monster place its hands. Had it forgotten to conceal itself? Could I only see it in that dreamlike state between sleep and consciousness? I never learned the answers to those questions. I've been asking them for a while, and no one wants to help me find the truth. I've been medicated. I've been hospitalized. Nothing has woke me up, wiped the fog from my eyes, and shown me that my encounters were imaginary. It's still real, and the creature is still here. I can help but sleep sometimes. I can only manufacture insomnia for so long, and when I do sleep, I see it. I see it when I wake up. At first, it was standing at the foot of my bed. Then it was leaning forward, with its palms on my mattress. Then it started climbing up. Each time I saw it, the monster was a little closer. The next time I sleep, I know its tiny dark eyes will be blinking down at me from directly overhead. I'll feel its breath on my cheek. I'll feel its claws on my chest. It still leaves marks, you know. It's cut the bed frame. It's turned my blankets to ribbons. I can only imagine what will happen to me when it's my flesh supporting the monster's weight. That's about all I imagine these days. The fear is past, I think. I think I've given up on finding help. I've given up on finding someone who believes. I just want to get this message out while I still can. When you hear the creatures knocking, don't go look. Sometimes that thing going bump in the night is better left undiscovered. I saved a man's life once. That's a good way to start a story, huh? I think so. It always gets a few heads to turn. Truthfully, I wish I'd saved more than one. For as long as I worked in the park service, you'd think more opportunities would have presented themselves. Lucky for me, I didn't join up to be a hero. It just so happened, that day, I was in the right place, at the right time. I saved a man's life, and then I got called a liar. The day started real typical. It was just another shift, you know? Another walk through the park in the Pacific Northwest. I don't remember what I was looking for, at least not originally. The details of that morning have mostly faded away. The afternoon was too memorable for the rest of the day to stick around. A call came in over the radio. One of the towers was reporting smoke. There were no campsites in the area, so someone needed to investigate. We needed to get the situation under control before it had the chance to spread. I was the closest, so I headed that way. Backup would be behind me, just in case. I wasn't equipped to fight a forest fire, but I could at least provide eyes on the ground. Later, I found myself wishing that it was just a fire that I came across. There were some flames, of course. Someone had wrapped a jacket around a fallen branch and lit it ablaze. It had been tossed or dropped, I'm not sure which, and it was burning through the brush by the time I arrived. As I was reporting what I found, the someone responsible came into view. They came running. They came screaming. I shifted my weight, felt like I was under attack. But the stranger wasn't coming to harm me. They were warning me. They were yelling and waving their arms, urging me out of the area. The closer they got, the more I saw. They were beaten and battered. Something had attacked them. I asked if it was a bear. They didn't answer. I thought maybe another man then. Maybe a pair of hikers had gotten into an altercation and one of them had spiraled off the deep end. I couldn't have been further from the truth. When they reached me, the hiker all but collapsed into my arms. They were sobbing. My guess, they thought they failed. I was still standing there after all. Then came the roar. Something called out to us behind the growing wall of fire and smoke. It roared deeply and made me tremble in my boots. It sounded like something from the TV. I thought of the cup of water in that dinosaur movie. I was shaking like that little glass. Trouble was coming. I lifted the hiker back to their feet and told them to run. I pointed in the direction help would be coming and trusted that they would make it. They did, but saving a life doesn't come cheap. I watched them run, disappearing into the trees, then looked back at the fire. There was a silhouette on the other side, a massive, lumbering shape that stood perfectly still despite the heat. It was head and shoulders above the flames, which were already high enough to cover my body. What eyes glistened in the firelight? The orange glow illuminated an ape-like face. I don't know what it was. Not really. That still hasn't been answered, but I know it leapt through that fire like it wasn't there at all. It reeked of wet soil and burnt hair. The smell made my lungs tighten even more than the smoke itself. I had no choice but to breathe it in. The creature was upon me right away. It moved so fast that I could hardly believe it. I was on the ground before I understood what was happening. My eyes were rolling in my head. The pain didn't start for a few more moments. I was too stunned to realize I was hurt, I guess. Then came the ache, up my spine and into the base of my skull. There was a hot, wet trickle on my forehead. I knew it right away to be blood. I tried to stand, but couldn't. I couldn't climb back upright to fight the beast. I had a baton and a can of bear spray on me. I stumbled to one knee and tried the spray. The creature flinched, but didn't flee. It only paused as it circled me to check the spread of the fire. It knew we didn't have a lot of time. I swung my baton wildly, yelling incomprehensible words while I obsessed over the thought of that hiker. At least they'd gotten away, I told myself. At least it was just me out there. The animals were locked on me. I could see that it meant to attack again. Then we heard the rest of them, my backup, the rangers and the firefighters both, shouting and stomping through the woods. I watched those violent eyes soften, approach something that looked like fear, and finally, the monster ran, back through the fire, back into the woods. The details fade again after that. I only remember waking up in the hospital, being told that I didn't see a thing, that I got caught in the fire and pinned below the foliage. You get told that enough times, I guess you believe it. I did for a while. But I couldn't forget that hiker. They weren't running from the flames. They started that fire just to slow the monster down. There must have been proof, right? Witness testimony from the person I found out there. By the time I was released from the hospital's care, none of it existed. I never learned their name. We never talked about what happened. And no one ever acknowledged the thing that I saw. But I did save someone's life.
Hey Donovan, my name is Tom, and I've really started getting into all the stories on your channel. I consider myself open-minded, but feel even more open lately. When hearing about strange encounters, I find it funny how people think they know exactly how a person would react to a certain situation, like running and screaming, and then use that as a reason to question authenticity, when in reality, we don't even know how we would react until we are in that situation for ourselves. I never really had any strange encounters myself until recently. Whatever it was stuck with me for a few weeks after, so I thought I'd share it. But before the encounter, I watched a lot of paranormal and skinwalker videos the weeks before. I can't help but wonder if that primed my mind to imagine those types of things, or worse, somehow welcome them into my life. I'm also not exactly sure what I saw. Anyways, me and my friends went out to play pool one night at a local place, and we got some fast food from the drive-thru. It was around 11 or 12 o'clock at night, so the place was drive-thru only. So my friends suggested we sit and eat at a local park with a duck pond. I just want to mention that I live in a decently populated area, and not deep in the country where a lot of these stories seem to happen. And also, it's not just what I saw that was weird, but all the events that happened leading up to it. Anyways, me and my friends started eating and talking at a bench table in the park. It was dark, but there was enough park lights so we could see decently well. This is when it started to get weird though. The park we were at has a pond that stretches from the road to a little waterfall at the end, and parallel to that, a wire fence separates the park from a cemetery. There is also a large shed against that fence. This is important to know because my friends and I saw a deer next to this shed. We weren't freaked out, and a deer in itself wasn't a concern, but we all found it weird because it was like it just appeared. I know deer can jump, but if it jumped the fence, I think one of us would have heard it. And it only really had two other directions it could have walked by us realistically, but we would have saw it first. The park is not very large, and when we saw it,
It had its back to the fence, and the large shed to its side and us on its other side. So that was weird. But after a while, I saw something else. It didn't freak me out at the time, but I think only because my mind went into a safe mode or something, or it was in a state of denial and trying to explain away what I was seeing as a raccoon. But when I got home, it came flooding back, and I was really freaking out over it. I was sitting at this circular bench table with my friends. I didn't make note of it to them or talk about this with them, but from my seat, I was facing the cemetery bordering the park. I don't know if it was like a demon, a skinwalker, a weird raccoon, or what, but I saw something crawling from behind one of the gravestones to another. It crawled in a way that made me think of a sloth, if that makes sense. But it was like slinking over with its body dragging on the ground, pulling itself forward with its limbs. And they looked long, like a sloth's. Again, I don't know of a raccoon that moves like that, or any sloths that live in New Jersey. And I clearly remember not seeing a tail on this thing as well. In all honesty, I would feel better if I knew for sure it was actually a raccoon, or like escaped sloth or something. But I don't think it was, and the experience has certainly stuck with me. But then there's more. A few weeks after that, I heard what sounded like a girl moaning around 2 a.m., but it sounded fake. I don't know how else to describe it, and it was loud enough that whatever it was had to be coming from directly out of a window or in the immediate area out in back of the apartment I live in. I know what some people might be thinking it could have been, and I thought the same thing, possibly, and later I didn't think much more of it. But then it happened a few days later, and I froze. It was like moaning like the last time that I heard around 2 a.m., but it sounded even more animal-like. The call started out like a normal human moan, but in the end, they sort of tailed off into a bird-like sound, kind of like a goose. But it did not at all sound like a goose. This time I had to ask my brother if he heard the noise, because a human or an animal making a noise like that seems too unreal. He too heard it, and I can't escape the thought of something trying to lure me that terrified me. And behind the apartment is a parking lot surrounded by more apartments, so I should have been able to see some clue of whatever it was. And even if it was nothing paranormal, it was interesting to see how I reacted in such a situation and got a taste for these sort of occurrences, because now I know if I actually stared face to face into the eyes of some demon or mystical creature like some of your listeners report, I would probably die of a heart attack or from sheer fear alone. Maybe I should be more grateful that I haven't had such a grand encounter, at least more so than what I just described, and I hope to never see anything like that in the future. Hey Donovan, my name is Clint. I'm a 39-year-old San Diego chef, and I'm writing to you because while in my 20s, an unexplained situation happened between my brother Cass and I while we were driving through the desert in California. A little backstory. My brother and I have always been really close. We did everything together. We were only a year apart, with him being a year younger. We went to school together all the way through high school. Growing up, both of us were athletic, always had brotherly competitive nature, while we spent most of our days skateboarding, surfing, and getting Mexican food, the normal San Diego vibe in the 90s, the best years I might add. We always took care of one another. We got into multiple fights together, we got jobs together, and when the other was in trouble, we could always talk and laugh about any situation, good or bad, and kind of just move on. As we got older, we didn't really have any plans for our future. I was 20 and he was 19, and both never considered regular college because honestly, our grades were, let's just say, not good. We were more of the street smart kids that liked to hustle. Both of us very creative and artistic.
We were always expressing ourselves through art as graffiti writers, musicians, and trying to create a skateboard clothing line. Nothing really panned out. We loved food and wanted to stay creative, so we decided to go into culinary school together. Surprisingly, we excelled in cooking, and the both of us are now executive chefs in San Diego and Los Angeles. Moving on, my brother was in a relationship with this girl that he was over the moon for and would do anything for this girl. Halfway through culinary school, I got a panicked knock on my bedroom door after midnight. It woke me up and I opened the door to my brother freaking out over his girlfriend. I first talked him off the ledge and explained that his girlfriend that recently started attending a college at ASU, she had broke up with him due to the long-distance relationship. It broke my heart to see him this way. But being irrational, he said, "Please come to me with Arizona," so he can physically try to win this girl back or talk to her or talk her into staying with him. At this point, it's a little after 1 a.m. I asked, "Okay, man, but when are you trying to go?" "Right now," he said. Without question, I grabbed my wallet, a change of clothes, and we got into his car and left. I was still in my pajamas. Like I said, irrational. It was a 5 or 6 hour drive. The drive was actually fun the first couple hours, listening to music and cracking jokes and just enjoying being able to do whatever the hell we wanted. After driving a bit, it was a little after 3 a.m. We were driving through the Octillo Desert, which is a super long road that's desolate. We haven't seen a single car pass us by. We were all alone. There's absolutely no streetlights, and it's a pretty scary drive to take at this time. Pretty stupid if you ask me. After a bit, my brother's car ate up a mixtape I made on the cassette a week before, and now there's no music. So we only had our conversation to entertain us. What happened next to this day still bothers me, and my brother refuses to talk about it. I noticed just down the road, up about a mile up, this bright light was swooping across the road, right to left to right, and over. Imagine how a skateboarder rides a half pipe. That's exactly the way this big ball of light was moving. At first, we thought maybe someone is out here flying an RC plane having fun. We stayed on course driving slowly to understand what we were looking at. Then I said, what if it's a Cessna or a personal plane and someone's in trouble? Every time this light swooped down, I thought that this thing was going to crash. It was coming so close to the road that it lit up the street clearly. This didn't make sense because it didn't have any combustion sounds, a propeller sound, or really anything. It's just this high-pitched noise. My brother was panicking because we were getting closer and closer to the object. He wanted to pass by and tried to time it where once this thing was swooped down, we would pass it and be on our way. He floored it to gain as much speed as possible. This object did pass by, and as we were going as fast as this thing could muster, the damn car died and rolled to a stop. It felt like we stopped on train tracks because we were perfectly on course with this thing's trajectory. We looked up to the sky on the right side through the front of the windshield. I saw this thing make a slight turn, and now it was coming back towards us. He was trying so hard to start the car, and it wouldn't turn over. It was sputtering with barely any power. The light was a round craft that made no sense. I saw what it looked like because of the angle when it turned around, and the light shone in a way that made this thing observable. This thing was coming down fast, blindly bright on a direct collision course with us sitting in the car that died in the middle of the desert. I remember saying, "We're going to die in a Hyundai." Before we knew it, this light or craft or whatever the hell this object was hit the Hyundai on the passenger side, and everything went white. It felt like only seconds, at most a minute of being in REM sleep. I recall hearing clicks, weird sounds, and a few voices that sounded like raspy gurgles that was an eerie echoing. The weirdest part of the story is, we both woke to us driving back on the 8 West about 20 minutes away from home. We were on the freeway driving back into San Diego going 55 miles per hour. We both slowly woke at the same time while the car was in motion. Very confused, I mumbled, "Where are we?" I said, "Are we in Arizona?" My brother said, "I don't know, not sure." We saw an exit sign that said El Cajon Boulevard, and I said, "We're back home." It was almost 10 a.m., and we're freaking out. We pulled over trying to remember what happened, and we actually remembered everything that happened up until after we got hit. We had hours of missing time. It was impossible to be where we were. There was only one road there, and one road back. We don't remember fixing the car, turning around, or where we were. We just woke up to driving on a freeway simultaneously. Someone or something that hit us caused a portal, missing time, or something very unexplainable. After this happened, my brother refused to talk to me about this situation every time that I bring it up. I always try to solve what happened. I think something happened to him a little differently, which scared him so bad during our experience that he completely changed. This had caused PTSD for him and gave him really bad social anxiety. After graduating, we grew apart and barely talk. I know for a fact whatever happened to us or hit us changed our life's direction or destiny. I've given up on trying to explain this story to family, friends, or even a few coworkers. Even my parents in long relationships don't respond or say anything or ask any questions. People tend to change the subject. This is an honest, truthful encounter. I wish it never happened because it broke the bond between two brothers that shouldn't be apart.
My grandmother was always a superstitious person. I didn't put too much faith into her theories myself. I always believed that if I couldn't see something or touch it, it wasn't real. I was visiting her one summer, just before I headed out on a camping trip with one of my friends. She asked where I was going, and I told her. It was a state forest land on the southern end of the Appalachian Mountains. She grew up around that area, so I thought she would be excited for me, but she most definitely was not. She begged me not to go, but my bags were in my car, and I had already reserved the campsites. Plus, my friend was on her way. Once she realized she couldn't talk me out of it, she gave me some advice. It sounded nonsensical to me at the time, just more of her superstitious rants. But I wish I had listened. The first thing she told me was never whistle in the forest, and if you hear someone else whistling, definitely do not whistle back. Then she told me to stay inside my tent after dark, no matter what, even if I had to get up to pee. She said to pee in a cup, but definitely do not go outside. And if I heard anything outside, do not investigate it until the morning. And then the advice started to get crazy. She told me that if I heard a baby crying, no, I didn't. She told me that if I heard someone calling for help, no, I didn't. She told me that if I heard anyone calling my name, especially with the voices of people I know, no, I didn't. I asked her what she was so afraid of, but she wouldn't say. She said its name cannot be spoken. The only thing she told me was that it lived in the woods and would try to lure me off the trail any way it could. She said if I heard someone in the woods calling for help, call the forest rangers. It's their job to help people. I listened to what she had to say, but I didn't believe a word of it. She seemed to believe I was in real danger on this trip. I kept her advice in the back of my head. I knew she was just worried about me, but a lot of grandparents get like that. I headed out for my trip regardless. We were only supposed to be out for 3 nights. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's more than enough camping for me, especially since these campsites didn't have modern amenities. We got there and everything seemed perfect. The weather was warm. but there was an overcast, so the sun wasn't beating down on us as we hiked the 5.5 miles into our campsite. However, I couldn't shake the conversation I had earlier with my grandmother. I knew all the stuff that she said wasn't real. It was all ghost stories, but for some reason, I was afraid. The campsites had some distance between them, but it really didn't matter because it looked like we were the only ones at the campground. Odd, but not unheard of. The drive-in campgrounds fill up much faster than the hike-in ones, but I was surprised to have the entire area to ourselves. The entire time, I felt like I was being watched, but it wasn't until the third day that we had our encounter. We had misjudged the length of the trail we had set out on that day. As the trail went on and on, it looked like we wouldn't make it back to camp until well after dark. We had sorted ourselves out, and we were finally on the right path to the campground when we heard someone calling from inside the forest. Someone calling for help. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew it wasn't a person. I never told my friend about the things my grandmother said. She wanted to go into the forest to help this person, but I held her back. They called out again, and they said they were injured. I didn't know how to explain the situation to my friend without sounding crazy. The person in the woods kept trying to get us to come in there until I finally told them that I had my cell phone with me and luckily had service. I didn't, but they didn't need to know that. I told them that I was dialing the ranger station right now and someone would be out to help very soon. The voice suddenly stopped. I ushered my friend out of there as fast as I could. I told her I'd explain everything when we got back to the camp. In truth, I wanted to leave all our camping gear there and make a run for the truck. But that would have been too rough of a hike to do in the dark. We reached the campground and took a look around. Nothing seemed out of place. I wasn't keen on spending another night out there, but we didn't have much of a choice. We quickly made a dinner and zipped ourselves into the tent for the night. Sometime during the night, we were both awakened to the sounds of someone walking around outside. A moment later, we hear someone calling for help. It was the same voice we had heard earlier that evening. My friend was convinced it was a murderer, and they were about to rip us out of our tent and kill us. But I knew it wasn't human. It was the thing my grandmother had warned me about. My friend pulled out her knife and her can of bear spray. From the sound of it, the creature was right outside our tent. I told her not to, but she unzipped the door of the tent, aiming the bear spray at whatever was out there. She screamed the moment she saw it. It was some humanoid type of creature, but skinny and ghostly pale, like some sort of ghoul. Its eyes were half the size of its head, and I thought I saw jagged teeth, but I couldn't be sure. I grabbed the bear spray from my friend's hand and squeezed the trigger. Whatever it was, the bear spray sent it running. Neither of us got any sleep for the rest of the night, and we packed up our camp as soon as the sun rose. It was the last time I ever went camping. I don't know what that creature was, or what it wanted to do to us, but I don't intend to find out. I live in Rocky Point, Long Island, a nice little suburban town, a good ways out on the east end of the island. The area has a lot of homes, but it's nestled right along the north shore, so there's a surprisingly good bit of hiking and shoreline to explore. Still not exactly the kind of place to encounter, well, whatever it was. I like fitness, running, jogging, that sort of thing. Ever since I became a father, though, I haven't really had much time to do that stuff. I used to go to work after the gym or go running on the weekends, but those days are behind me for now. To get a bit of fitness in, I have to wake up at the ungodly hour of 4:30 a.m. so that I can get home in time to shower, cook breakfast, and get everyone ready for a busy day. And that's just what I did this past Friday morning. 4:30 in the morning is a strange time to be out and about. Most of the night owls have cashed in for the night, and all of the early risers are still snoozing safely in their bed. It almost feels like I have the streets all to myself, or so I thought. This morning, I picked one of the trails that ran along the bluffs atop the beach. It's an unusual trail, half on the road and the other half in the woods. It's high up from the beach, 100 feet at least, and you could get some spectacular views if you were in the right spot at sunrise. I was about 15 minutes in, and I was coming up to the part where the trail left the road and headed into the forest, when I caught a strange sight from my peripheral. A gray blur seemed to run along with me for a few seconds and then disappear. I stopped and looked for what it could have been, but I didn't hear or see anything. I figured maybe it was the glare from the headlights of a car on the next road over and didn't think much more of it. I headed into the trees and clicked my headlamp on. The first couple of times I did this, I was creeped out, but I was getting used to it now and was developing an appreciation for how different the forest looked in the pitch black. I had just rounded a curve on the trail and came to a skittering stop when I saw it, a human-sized shape standing still on the trail ahead, maybe 10 yards away. It was pale gray, just like the blur I had seen just a little bit ago. It held its hands over its face to block out the bright light from my headlamp, each hand with only 3 long, slender fingers. I was too stunned to say or do anything, and I felt a fear wash over me at the sight of something that clearly wasn't the same species. I backtracked a few feet and called out to it. Still, it held its hands over its face, a single yellow eye squinting between 2 of its digits. It's hard to explain what exactly happened next. I got the strong urge to turn the setting down on my headlamp to a low beam. Almost without thinking, I reached up and clicked twice on the button, turning my light down to its dimmest setting. The surrounding few feet were barely illuminated, and I had trouble seeing the entity in front of me. It lowered its hand from its face and confirmed that whatever it was wasn't human. This should have sent me into a panic, but instead, I felt the sense of fear ebb away and a strange passiveness come over me. It moved closer a few steps on long, spindly legs. I could make out its face now and could clearly see both of its large yellow, pupilless eyes. Its head was shaped like an upside-down pear, its cranium doubling in size from its slender chin. It didn't have a nose that I could see, or a mouth. Instead, it had 2 bold slits on each side of its face where its cheeks would be. Fleshy flaps covered each slit and moved slowly up and down in an imitation of breathing. I then felt something, a sort of message or some type of communication. Certainly nothing spoken out loud. I just suddenly had a feeling that this creature's name in front of me was Amos. I vaguely remember speaking my name out loud, and this is where the story will get disappointing to anyone listening, because I don't remember much of what happened next. I've had dreams over the last few nights, images and feelings that caught snatches of the conversation or thoughts. Piecing it all together, it seems like I spoke to Amos for quite a while, And indeed, when I finally became fully conscious, the sun was rising. I answered many questions about me and my family, about our community, and how what a normal day in my life was like. I think Amos communicated something about his home being 10,000 years away, but that's a unit of time, not distance. I remember a light being so stunning that I couldn't believe anything could be that bright. And that's it. As I said, I regained a sense of time just as the sun was rising and stumbling home in a state of confusion. I tried explaining everything to my wife and could tell she was more concerned than believing of me. I was so disoriented that I called into work sick that day and slept for several hours, dreaming about speaking with some kind of entity in the woods. I still can't explain what happened. I only know that it happened, and I'm not crazy. Of course, I'm aware of aliens and UFOs, but never really gave more than a passing thought to them. It's hard to believe that one could have visited Long Island and contacted me, of all people. I've learned that evil and foul things are hidden away in the shadowed corners of civilization, nightmares and monstrosities beyond the scope of what we can imagine. I'm sharing this with you because I'm too afraid not to. I can't continue as the sole person with knowledge of this creature. I live in a relatively small town of Linwood, Pennsylvania, right along the border with Delaware. The town itself is in a sad state of disrepair. Most of the population are low income or are on some form of benefits. Drugs and crime have run rampant throughout the town in recent years, and the effect can be felt in many families within, including my own. I'm less than proud of some things that I've done recently, but after the other night, well, see, there used to be an oil refinery down the road from my house. It closed just a few years ago, but most of the structures and machinery are still standing and intact. In that oil refinery, I discovered a veritable gold mine of copper piping, as well as other scrap metals. Twice before, I cut the fence and snuck in, leaving with enough stolen scrap to keep me satisfied for days at a time. Security was nearly non-existent. A single guard post at the old entrance, manned by an uninterested and likely underpaid security guard. Easy money. Until the other night. Like the two previous times, I used a pair of aviation snips to cut holes in the chain link fence and crawled my way through, each time in a different spot. I'm a drug addict, not an idiot. On this go-around, I decided to go deeper into the refinery than before. I was hoping to scout out some spots for the future and would hit closer to the fence line on my way back. I noticed a large building tucked beneath the massive overhead pipes, and it seemed like it was probably some kind of central control station or something. I nearly began salivating as I approached. Not too far from the door, I spotted something lying on the ground nearby. Two piles of clothing, folded neatly and stacked alongside each other, each with a pair of shoes placed tidily on top. The clothes themselves were dirty and were spotted with holes and rips, just like mine. Of course, I hadn't been the only one to think of this. Hell, I probably even knew them. But why fold the clothes and leave them outside? It didn't really matter. The door in front of me was closed tightly and took some prying with a crowbar to open, but I was able to make it inside. The second the door budged and I swung it open, I was struck with an odor of rotten meat, like a deer carcass left on the road in the summer. Even having lived in some nasty places, the smell made me gag. Unsure as to why I felt compelled to walk past the door and into the dark interior, Perhaps the smell alone would keep competition away, and pay dirt was close at hand. I entered, and as the smell became more wretched, I began losing confidence in my choice. After having checked the main room, which was mostly barren, I decided to peek into the next, and if nothing was of value, I was going to get out of there. Another door. This one opened easily. A faint red glow with no discernible light source filled the room. It was just bright enough that I could see some odd shape arching down from the ceiling, but not quite make out what it was. I had a cheap flashlight that I brought with me and fumbled it out of my pocket just before clicking it on. An abrupt warning in my mind told me not to turn around and run out of the building and refinery as quickly as I could. But my need for chemically induced euphoria overrode my eon-old instincts, and the light beamed brightly in the dark room. A tangle of flesh and cord hung from above. A pair of bodies sewn together at the head dangled from the ceiling, secured at the feet by what looked like wire. A grotesque human swing. In the middle of it sat a creature which I have trouble finding words to describe. An avian-like head, scarred with pockmarks and patches of bone, showing through where the skin had melted away. It has a long human torso, but pale-skinned. Globs of pus dropped from open wounds, and maggots inched along its surface. Language doesn't articulate what I felt at that moment. Terror and repulsion seemed too mild. Had I the means, I likely would have taken my life on the spot just to escape its presence. A few seconds or hours passed, and I regained enough composure to know I had to silently get away. It hadn't moved an inch, and I suspected it was unaware of me being there. Just as I felt my foot pass the threshold of the door, one of the swinging bodies began a slight squirm, and I heard what I swore to be a muffled voice crying for help. Some kind of awareness came over the creature, and it lifted a clawed foot to rake at the twitching figure. A gash appeared on the skin, and a mix of entrails and blood poured out. I vomited. The splash hit the ground at my feet, covering my shoes, and I heard an inhuman screech from above. I turned teary-eyed and nauseous and ran straight ahead, hoping to reach the door outside. I heard a thump on the ground behind me, followed by another shriek, a rush of feet behind me, and I threw my crowbar without looking. I heard it hit something soft. Just as I threw the door open, I heard a very clear human scream come from the room. "Don't leave." A female's voice screaming past her choking sobs. I ran out into the night and didn't stop. I can't go to the police. God knows I should, but I don't have the courage. I would likely get blamed, or at least arrested, for the trespassing and the thefts. I am a coward. I'm on a train to Florida. I have promised a friend, who is clean now, and promised to get me help to live a new life. The stench is stained into my nostrils. It will not go away, and I feel like I'm brought closer to the edge of sanity with each passing moment. I hope I can find help, and I hope whoever those people were, or are, that they find some kind of escape. I have a soft spot for animals. Who doesn't, right? As far back as I can remember, my attachment to animals has defined my life. From bringing home stray cats and wounded birds, to volunteering at the local shelter. It's been a journey. Every journey has its challenges. That's a weird way for me to accept what happened, but it's the best I've got. If I think about the encounter for too long, I get scared again. I start to wonder if maybe there are animals out there who don't deserve my sympathy. It makes me wonder if my soft spot is misplaced. It was a few years ago now, I mentioned it already, but I was volunteering at the local dog shelter. Animals needed cleaned, cared for, fed, and entertained. That was my job. I loved it. Things were strange around that time though. Throughout the week leading up to my encounter, we'd notice things. A trash can was tipped over one night. A window was broken. The back door was deeply scratched, as if by a knife or an axe of some kind. We couldn't imagine a reason for someone to want to break into the shelter, but we couldn't figure out what else could be causing the destruction. Since it was escalating, we knew we needed to get to the bottom of it. Unfortunately for us, the police weren't willing to spend their nights parked outside of the shelter. They had more important business to attend to. I don't say that bitterly either. I believed them. I wish I had been attending to something else that night too. Instead, I was there when the beast came knocking. We were rotating volunteers through an overnight security role. One of us, we figured, would discover what was happening outside of our building. We'd call the police, and then everything would be taken care of. If trouble was a lottery, I was the lucky soul who hit the jackpot. At about 11:30, I heard one of the metal garbage cans crash to the pavement. I heard the aluminum drone of it rolling across our parking lot. Great, I thought. Cleaning up all of that trash felt like it would be the worst part of my night. Then I looked outside, through the small window that we'd repaired earlier in the week, and I saw something terrible. The flicker of our parking lot lights revealed the creature in short bursts. The size stood out immediately. Even on all fours, its head was as tall as my car in the lot. It looked sick. I think it was covered in fur once, but it was almost naked now. Scabs and sores covered its emaciated body. It moved like a dog or a bear, except for the head full of pointed teeth that hung from its shoulders. It swayed its head from side to side, sweeping the parking lot like a bull searching for a patch of grass. I don't know what this thing was looking for. I know when I gasped, it heard me, and suddenly, it was looking for me. It ran toward the window first. I heard its clawed feet scraping the pavement. Then it turned away. It must have remembered that the window was too small. There was no point in breaking it again. Instead, it crashed into the back door. I called the police immediately. I called the thing a bear to avoid any extra questions. They said they'd be on site soon with animal control beside them. They couldn't come soon enough. The monster was barking and yipping. Its cries were deep and wet, like its throat was filled with phlegm. All the while, it clawed at the door. I listened as the grooves got deeper. I listened as it slammed its body weight into the frame and threatened to buckle the entire wall. The dogs in their cages were howling. They were trying to escape, furiously chewing at the chains and hinges that kept them in place. I understood how they felt. I wanted to escape too, but I had nowhere to go. So I stood and I waited. I shuddered in sweat through my clothes. All the while, the door got thinner. I knew sooner or later it would give. It would break in half, and the monster would come barreling through, squeezing its broad, bony shoulders through the narrow opening. It would chase me through the shelter. The chase would be over quick. Then I'd be the meat stuck between its teeth. Those few minutes felt like a lifetime. Soon, I couldn't distinguish between the sounds of my own wailing and the wails of the dogs around me. Each claw that scraped the door felt like it was scraping my bones. Then came the sirens, the flashing lights. The nearer they drew, the more the presence of the beast faded. First, the scratching stopped, then the growling. Then I knew it had turned and run away. The police came through that same door. They only needed to push it once to break through it. That's how close I was to being that monster's dinner. Animal control fanned out and searched the area. They knew based on the damage to the outside of the building that something had been there and had tried to get in. But there were no signs of the beast beyond the parking lot. I told the police what I saw. I explained that it wasn't an animal I knew. They said exactly what I predicted. It was a bear. It was a sick, confused bear. I've never known of an animal to pursue a human meal to such great lengths. I've never known a bear to saw through a door just to capture someone. But I was grateful to be alive. Too grateful to complain or to ask questions. I stopped working at that shelter, and the monster stopped coming too. Both of us were shaken by that night, I guess. I was hoping that you could answer something for me. Before that night, what was it after? Why was it trying to break into our shelter in the first place? Did it know about the dogs inside? Was it hoping to get in? I've been chasing something all my life. I think it's approval. Maybe I'm wrong. I think it's my own approval, actually. I think I'm searching for an excuse to tell myself I've done a good job. I'm searching for a way to believe it. Maybe. That chase led me to a career in the military. In my 20s, it just made sense. What other job would give me the sense of pride that I was looking for? Thank you for your service. I liked hearing it. It might have been the wrong reason to join up, but I know I did some good while I was there. I did some bad too, I think. And that's the story I want to tell. I want to talk about one of the bad nights. I was out in Nevada. You can guess where. I don't think I have to tell you. It's better for everyone if I don't spell it out anyway. On that particular day, I was escorting a convoy from Las Vegas to Groom Lake. We weren't doing anything special. There was a recruitment push happening in the city, and the presence of our vehicles made things look more legit. On the way back to Groom Lake, as the neon lights faded beneath us, we cut our path underneath a dark, blank sky. Something appeared. Something came for us. I'd been chasing something all my life. Remember? That night, something wanted to chase me. The sky was barren, like I said. There was still too much light pollution from the city for us to see the stars. There was a haze of purple and green hues between us and the heavens. The faint glow of that pollution was at least enough to light our way. It gave us a general overview of our surroundings, while our headlights revealed the road. Then it all disappeared. It all went black. We were a team of 5 vehicles, and one by one, our headlights began to flicker. They never shut off completely, but it had become apparent to all of us that we'd crossed the threshold that we couldn't see. Something was interfering with the lights. As our convoy blinked in and out of view, the haze overhead was swallowed whole. It was replaced by a pitch-black sky, impenetrable, darker than black, really, like it was a combination of colors so deep that our eyes couldn't reach it. We stopped moving. A few of us jumped out, myself included. When we looked up, we realized that the darkness overhead was a passing cloud or an astral body. It was humming. We could feel it in our bones. It was a ship of some kind. No lights, no engines that we could see, and it was just idling above us. The electric hum in our bones made the hairs on our arms stand upright. We weren't equipped for something like this, not physically or mentally. Until that moment, I thought I had been a part of something big. Thank you for your service. It didn't get bigger than the US military. I was wrong. There was something much bigger than us. And that night, it was right overhead. It was the magnifying glass of the cosmos as far as I was concerned. We were the ants about to get burned. We jumped back in our vehicles and drove as quickly as we could. Silently, effortlessly, it followed. I'd never seen anything move like that. It glided through the sky like a shark might glide through water. The men were yelling. I was too, I'm sure. I don't know what we had to say. We were 15 minutes out from the base. We thought surely the thing above us had been picked up by our peers. We were confident that it would be chased away in the next few seconds. The cavalry never came. Instead, we felt it closing in. We felt the structure overhead getting closer. As it chased us, it crept nearer to the ground. We were expecting to hear the metal form crash against the roofs of our vehicles. We thought we'd be smashed by the giant black slate. We were sweating, screaming, crying, I'm sure. Then we could see it, the base. We saw the lights and the posted guards, the security on the perimeter, and the man that would let us through the gate. We watched them leap to action. The base came alive like a sleeping dragon, disturbed by some tiny thief, but still, the support didn't come. When we looked up to see why they hadn't opened fire on the ship overhead, we realized that it was gone. It had completely disappeared, changed course, and soared away without a single change in the atmosphere. We didn't hear it move. We didn't feel it. The electric hum was still inside of us, maybe kept alive only by our fear. We recounted the story to our superiors immediately, of course. They had picked up nothing. They'd seen nothing. And now, we had no proof of our encounter. I didn't believe them. They had to have known. How could they have missed it? A few of us lashed out, tried to argue. We were passionately shut down and directed to keep our mouths shut. And unless we were alone, with a few drinks around the table, none of us talked about that ship. I left the military some time ago. It never gave me that thing I was chasing. Lately, I've been wondering if it's because of that lie. If it's because I didn't report what we saw. I didn't tell the public. How many others shared our experience and were made to look crazy? If I'm letting my friends and neighbors deal with that alone, am I really serving them? I know we didn't imagine it. I hope by sharing this story that someone else will realize the same thing. Maybe they've shut you up, but that doesn't mean you're crazy. That doesn't mean you're alone. They are out there. We've seen them. I tried living off the grid for a while. I always loved nature, you know. I even worked with the Park Service for a few years. I thought I was built for the outdoors. I thought I'd be more at home, off in the seclusion somewhere, with only the land and the sky as my neighbors. Since I'm telling the story, I bet you've guessed it. I was wrong. Other things live out there. You see, things that I never thought about meeting. Things I didn't realize I'd have to fight to survive. I ordered the cabin in pieces, hauled it off to the woods, and assembled it by myself. Those first few weeks went by without so much as a bump in the road. I told myself I'd found peace. Wrong again. The knocking started around week 6. It wasn't at my front door, mind you. It was somewhere off in the trees, somewhere that I couldn't see. It came at dusk, dinner time. I remember the fork trembling in my hands as I froze mid-bite, listening to that knock in the woods. There was a pattern to it, something intelligent. It wasn't the wind blowing a branch against the trunk of a tree. It was intentional. It felt like some unintelligible version of Morse code had drifted through my window. It was the language of something else, a dialect not designed by mankind. It made my skin crawl. I searched the perimeter that night with a torch in my hand. I found nothing, just the usual signs of animal tracks. Maybe if I had stayed out there longer, or looked a little harder, maybe I would have found a reason to run away. Lord knows I should have. The knocking continued. It came the next night. Again at dusk. This time, I wasn't eating. I was expecting it. I ran in the direction of the sound, determined to find whoever it was that was tormenting me. It had to be a man, I told myself. It had to be someone poking fun at the stranger in the cabin. When I got close, the sound stopped. I saw a flash of something large and furry, ducking between the trees. It moved too fast for me to tell what it was. A deer, I thought. Maybe a bear. I didn't know how long the fur was. I was debating how large it really could have been. When I saw that hairy shape cutting across the foliage, I stopped in my tracks. Regardless of what it was, the animal wasn't what I was looking for, and I didn't need to make an enemy of a territorial predator. It vanished. The next night, no knocks. But in the morning, there was a stone in front of my door. It was a boulder, really. Too large for me to wrap my arms around, and far too heavy for me to move on my own. Judging by the mud splattered around it, the stone had been tossed there. Something had picked it up, hauled it over, and slammed it into the earth. I couldn't believe I hadn't heard it. I was too relieved that the knocking hadn't returned. I guess a wet thud wasn't enough to wake me from my slumber. I wish it had been. Again, I find myself wishing that I had seen the truth. My little cabin beyond society might have been peaceful, but it wasn't exactly safe. Off the grid meant beyond the safety net, and safety was something I needed in my immediate future. Dusk. It always came at dusk. There was a loud crash as another stone hit the side of my wooden home. It was the size of a softball. I saw it the moment I went to the window, laying there on the ground. Then I saw the second one coming. It shattered the glass pane and only barely missed my head. Glass crunched under my boots as I hurried to find my rifle. Another stone hit the cabin in the meantime. When I got outside, I saw it. Its arm was cranked back, another heavy stone in its palm. It stood like a major league pitcher, at about 3 times the size. It was human-like. That made me slow to look down from the sights of my gun, like a massive man covered in a brown sheep-like fur. I'd never seen anything like it. When I raised the rifle, the stone hit my shoulder. I screamed, swerved, and fired into the air. Hit nothing. When I landed on the ground, not far from the boulder outside my door, I realized how perilous my situation really was. I couldn't bring the gun back up. I could barely drag myself into a sitting position. My shoulder was too hurt. I'd learn later that my collarbone was broken. I looked for the giant man in the woods, expecting to see another stone trained on my position. I knew it wouldn't hesitate to bludgeon me into the earth. It would erase me right there, press me flat until I was just a stain on the dirt. But the beast was gone. No one was standing among those trees. The roar of the gunshot must have scared it. It must have thought the weapon was too much of a risk. I'm lucky the thing didn't stick around to assess just how damaged I already was. It thought I'd have more fight in me. I tell myself I would have survived either way. Deep down, I know I got lucky. It wasn't easy getting back to a hospital, giving up the cabin. It wasn't easy telling the story at first. I've accepted it now, though. The truth is, no one is ever going to believe me. You don't believe me now, do you? But I can't help myself. My shoulder still aches when it rains. The hair on my neck still stands up when the sun starts to set. The story might be hard to swallow, but it's harder not to tell it. As a parent, seeing your child in imminent danger is one of the most heart-stopping, panic-inducing scenarios you could ever be in. It also draws out a savage intensity, something eons old, buried deep inside. I want to write what happened while it's still fresh in my memory. This is what happened. I live in Westchester, PA. It's an ideal place to raise a family. The schools are generally very good. and there is no shortage of activities to do outside. My son is a little too young for sports. He's only 3, but he loves being outside more than anything else. A few days ago, we had an abnormally warm day for February, and being that I was off for the day and my wife was at her sister's house, I decided to take the opportunity and take my son for a long walk along one of the mild hiking trails nearby. I loaded up the stroller, grabbed some snacks and water, and took the 15-minute ride over to the trailhead. It's almost funny. You never imagine little decisions like this may be some of the last ones you make. It was a loop trail, and it usually only took me about 45 minutes to complete. But going with my son was a little different. There were going to be plenty of stops, and he liked to get out of the stroller every few minutes. In all, it was probably going to take us around 90 minutes. But I didn't mind. We didn't have much else to do. I guess we were halfway through when I started to notice something odd. Quick flashes out of the corner of my eyes, 2 or 3 times. It could have been a deer, but my son was pretty talkative that day, and they probably would have heard us coming from a ways off. I ignored it, and eventually we came to a little footbridge, crossing a small stream. We stopped and threw some rocks into the water and hung out for a minute. That's probably what saved us. The trail ahead was clear for a few hundred feet. For some instinctual reason, I suddenly glanced up from the stream below, and far ahead on the trail, something emerged from behind a copse of trees. It stood high on 2 legs. Even from a distance, I could see it was massive, covered head to toe in brown fur and 2 long dangling arms, almost reaching the ground. It had a wolfish jowl, narrow and elongated. It was too far to make out its eyes, but I could feel that it was staring at me. I had no idea what it was, and firmly grabbed my son, tossing him over one shoulder. I began to slowly walk away, pulling the stroller along with me, keeping my eyes on the creature. Once we were over the bridge, it dropped down to all 4s and began a slow prowl in our direction, matching our pace. My son had no idea what was happening and was struggling in my arms to get down. The growing fear in my chest made me accidentally over-tighten my grip, and he let out a half-shout, half-cry of surprise. At hearing that noise, the beast's ears shut up, and after a momentary pause, it burst into a loping sprint, heading directly for us. I abandoned the stroller and shifted my son so that I was carrying him like a football under my arm. I didn't get but a few yards when I threw a glance over my shoulder and saw the creature rapidly gaining on us. I knew that there was no way to outrun it. I believe if I was by myself, I likely would have become overcome with terror and froze up. Seeing a non-existent creature materialize from seemingly thin air and bounding toward you is probably too much for the modern psyche to cope with. But I wasn't alone, and I wasn't about to have the most precious thing in my life taken from me. My son was crying loudly now, feeling that something was wrong, but there was no time to be gentle. I dropped him to the ground and wheeled to face the approaching monstrosity. It was only a few dozen yards away, and I charged forward to meet it. It was on top of me in an instant. I was blown back to the earth, and the impact alone nearly knocked me out. But my son's shriek of terror enraged me, and I held on. Its claw was raking my left leg with incredible strength. The power of the creature well outmatched me. Its jaw was snapping right near my ear. I could hear the clack of its teeth each time. I kicked myself off the ground, rolling over to where I was on top. Both of its legs pushed me nearly off. I put my face into the scruff of the creature's neck and bit down, tasting dirt and almost gagging on the mouthful of hair. A clawed hand gripped my shirt from the back, tossing me to the ground. It was back on top of me immediately. I felt its jaw latch onto my left shoulder, but it was unaccompanied by any pain. I reached my right hand out, desperately grasping for anything. My son's shrieks of horror continued, and my aching heart dropped into the pit of my stomach. My hand found a half-buried rock the size of a fist. I ripped it from its earthen tomb and struck the creature in the head. Once, twice, 5 times, 10 times. I felt its grip loosen and struck again. I think I hit it in the eye, but it dropped my shoulder and let out a human-like bark of pain. I went on the attack and continued hammering blow after blow onto the creature. It had enough, and with another shriek of pain, leaped to its feet, running off the trail and into the forest. I was badly wounded, bleeding in several spots. I rushed over to my son, and he was completely fine. The adrenaline was fading now, and the combined blood loss was making me unsteady on my feet. I hustled my son over to a tree and leaned against it. I was almost to the point of blacking out, but somehow still had enough focus to undo my bootlace and tie my son's ankle to mine. I woke up in a hospital room. My wife was there with my son and her parents. I had passed out, but fortunately, another couple had happened upon us not too long afterward. They were able to get some help and keep my son safe until they arrived. God bless them. Overall, I was okay. I eventually ended up giving a statement to the police. Obviously, it sounded a little incredulous, but my wounds had come from somewhere, no doubt. They probably thought it was some kind of wolf or cougar, which there aren't any in this part of the state. I don't know what it was myself, and I guess it really doesn't matter. My son and I are alive, and mostly unharmed. I just hope that the next time, whatever that thing was, thinks twice before trying to prey. I'm a retired Army veteran, and when I first retired, I moved to a small town in La Frontera, a beautiful region along the Texas-Mexico border. I had wanted to live there for a long time and had done quite a bit of research on it and had visited several times. It's known for its rugged landscapes and rich cultural heritage, and I fell in love with it the first time I visited. Anytime it would get tough for me in the Army, I would think to myself, just keep pushing until La Frontera. I'm so grateful that I survived and can live out the rest of my days here as I have dreamed of my entire life. La Frontera is a very beautiful place. The locals are friendly, the markets are bustling, and have everything you could possibly ask for. The natural scenery is incredibly picturesque everywhere you look. I have always been an outdoorsman and enjoyed hiking, fishing, and hunting. La Frontera was the perfect place for me to indulge in these activities. Anytime I want, I can go explore the countryside, fish in the Rio Grande, and hunt game in the nearby mountains. It's my paradise. Several years ago, however, I had a near-death experience that changed me from a non-believer and total skeptic to an avid enthusiast of all things in the paranormal realm. I had just finished fishing and was lugging my cooler back to my truck when I heard this horrible hissing and screeching noise. I've heard my brothers in the Army screaming in the heat of battle, but the sound this thing made was the worst thing I have ever heard. I spun around looking at the tree line where the hideous sound came from, but couldn't see anything. I had my hand on my holster, ready to use my gun if I needed to. I carefully scanned the area in front of me, but couldn't see anything. After a while, I slowly continued moving toward my truck. Some time passed, and I figured I was no longer in danger. My arm was also getting tired from holding the cooler, so I used both hands to haul it and made my way toward my truck. I threw the cooler in the back, and as I was heading toward the driver's side door, when I saw what looked like a large dog with glowing eyes and spikes along its back. It had big claws and fangs and was crouched in a pouncing position, like it was waiting for me. I slowly wrapped my hand around the handle of my gun and took cover behind the truck bed. I had heard stories about the chupacabra before, but I always thought it was a ridiculous urban legend. So many of the locals had told me stories of the chupacabra. Some said it killed their livestock. Some said it killed their dog. Some said it even kidnapped their children. And it seemed pretty much like everyone had a run-in with the chupacabra at some point. I always thought it was nonsense, but seeing it up close, it couldn't have been anything else. Suddenly, the creature ran towards me. I fired a shot, figuring the sound of the gun would scare it, but it jumped on me and immediately latched onto my arm. I fell to the ground, dropped my gun, and the beast was on top of me. I can still hear the sound of its hissing growl as it shook its head and ripped up my arm. I managed to grab my hunting knife and stab the beast in its neck. The creature let out another horrible screech and took off into the woods, taking my knife with it. I grabbed my gun, took off my shirt, and wrapped it around my arm. The thing seriously messed up my arm, and it was a gruesome sight. Had that thing bitten my shoulder, neck, or face, I probably wouldn't be alive to talk about it. I sped towards the nearest hospital and blacked out as soon as I got through the doors. The next thing I know, I woke up in a hospital room with bandages all over my arm. The doctor said I was very lucky to have survived such an attack, and he figured a bear bit me. When I told him it was a dog, he immediately, an educated doctor, said it must have been a chupacabra. It was surreal. The doctor then told me about how he had seen a chupacabra kill one of his parents' goats as a child. The creature he described sounded exactly like what had attacked me. I left the hospital, and after several months of rehabilitation, I was a changed man. I had always been very skeptical of anything that science hadn't deemed real, but it was obvious to me now that there was so much out there that we couldn't begin to understand. It made me think about all the near-death experiences I had in the army, and made me realize that it must have been God who had saved my life time and time again. I should have been dead 4 times, but something wasn't done with me, and it became obvious to me at that moment that I was put here on Earth for a reason. I began to research the chupacabra among other paranormal creatures that were said to roam in the surrounding area. It gave me a real sense of community to be able to share my own chupacabra experience with people. Anytime someone says there's no such thing as a chupacabra, I now just show them my arm scars and am usually met with silence. It's awesome. The doctors were amazed that I had survived such an attack. They had never seen anything like it before. They thought it might have been a rabid dog, but they had never heard of a dog with spikes on its back or glowing eyes. After several weeks of recovery, I left the hospital and went back to my home in La Frontera. I was a changed man. I had always been a skeptic, but now I knew that there were things in this world that were beyond our understanding. The spot where the chupacabra almost took my life is a spot that I frequent on a weekly basis now. I always go prepared. but I have yet to see him or even see a trace of him again. I can't say I hope to see him again, but at the same time, I feel like I have a deep connection with him. I am very grateful to the Chupacabra for igniting my faith and spiritual awareness. God works in mysterious ways. My favorite thing in the world to do is go into an abandoned building and photograph them. There is something so beautiful to me about how a neglected place falls apart due to nothing but time. I can't explain it, but I've always been obsessed with it. And anytime I'm not working or sleeping, I'm exploring abandoned buildings and documenting my findings. When an animal dies, there is something so fascinating to me about how it decomposes over time. And it trips me out to think that one day we will all do the exact same thing. I think that exploring abandoned buildings is a way that I can look at death as a natural, beautiful thing instead of a disturbing, morbid thing. I think if we can come to terms with the fact that we will all die one day, we can make the most out of our life and not simply exist based on fear. There was this place in Poughkeepsie, New York, called the Hudson River State Hospital that I visited quite a few years back. It was an abandoned psychiatric hospital that had closed in the early 2000s. It was a notorious spot to do some exploring and was apparently very haunted. Naturally, this piqued my curiosity, and I planned on spending the whole day exploring and photographing this place. There were 3 main buildings I was particularly excited about visiting. The first one, you could see from the parking lot of a local strip mall, which is where I did most of my planning. It was called Ryan Hall, which was first opened in 1934, and is where the violent and criminally insane patients were held. The way the building is laid out is that it's constantly in the shadows of a much bigger building nearby, called the Cheney Building. I also planned on visiting the morgue, which had refrigerated cold chambers where they would hold the dead bodies, and the Herman B. Snow Rehabilitation Center. This building opened in 1971 and had 2 bowling alley lanes, an auditorium, a basketball court, an indoor swimming pool, and various other recreational activities for the patients to enjoy. I bet both places would look amazing, run down, and dilapidated. The morgue would have been so creepy, and the recreational building would have made such incredible art. To think it was once a place where criminally insane patients would find some solace from an otherwise disturbed and crazed existence. The pictures would have been amazing. I visited Ryan Hall first, and what I experienced there forced me to cut my trip short, and I never got the chance to explore any of the other buildings. They've mostly been demolished now, and I regret not returning. But what happened to me in Ryan Hall was the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my entire life. I was so excited planning it in my car and researching what other people had experienced in those buildings. Finally, I made my way across the strip mall's parking lot and headed towards Ryan Hall. As soon as I stepped onto the property, my excitement went away and something didn't feel right. It was like I was being watched by someone or something. I had spent so much time planning this day, so I tried to brush it off as my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I made my way across the parking lot, which was falling apart and had grass and weeds growing through it. I got to the building, and it was just what I was hoping for. Creepy, dark, neglected, and the stale air hit you like a freight train. When you opened the door, the paint was chipping off the walls, the ceilings were exposed, the floor was in disarray, you name it. I got inside and started snapping some pictures. As I made my way through the building, I heard a faint whisper, which sounded like a woman's voice. I loudly asked if anybody else was there. I was half expecting to see more people exploring the inside of the facility, but nobody answered. I kept exploring and taking pictures, but I felt on edge. I got to this door that opened into a long hallway, and when I opened it, I was hit with cold air. It was the middle of summer, and this place hadn't had electricity for years. It freaked me out. I opened the door to a room that had a rickety old wheelchair sitting in the middle of it, and got a really creepy, incredible photo. I was looking at the picture I had taken when I heard these loud footsteps coming from a nearby room. It scared me, but I had to investigate the source of the footsteps. I opened the door where the footsteps came from, but it was empty. I was about to leave when I saw a shadow glide across the room. I froze, and then heard the whispering again. This time, it was a lot louder. It said, "Get out," right in my freaking ear, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, and there was nobody there. I sprinted out of the room and was trying to figure out where the exit was. I heard loud footsteps coming from behind me, and I screamed for help. Something shoved me to the ground, and as I turned to look, I saw a white, glowing apparition hovering above me. It eventually took the shape of a woman, and I was in shock and couldn't move. She looked me right in the eyes, and I had never been so scared in my life. I really thought I was going to die. Then she said, "Help me," and my instincts must have taken over. I sprinted out of there and took off towards my car as quickly as I possibly could. I got in my car and sped out of there and never looked back. My hands were bloody from catching myself on the ground after being shoved, and I started looking up stories of other people who had visited this place. I still photograph abandoned buildings all the time, but have never experienced anything close to what happened to me